think the one big advantage that we have as a country, and that is truly a structural advantage, not linked with any external variable, is the fact that we have a huge demographic dividend. We're talking about an average age of 27 something, and we will soon have the largest number of young people in the workforce as compared to any other economy anywhere in the world. And I think that is something that we need to cash in on, and that is an advantage that is, like I said, a very structural advantage that, something that no one can take away from us. The fact that we've become the fastest growing economy in the world at 7.5%, I think is something to really crow about. And then we've got all our macroeconomic fundamentals very much in place. And I think that if you look at, for example, current account deficit, 1% of GDP, inflation 5%, down from 10%. A few years ago, you're talking about much more financial inclusion, 200 million accounts opened in the last 1 year. You're talking about a currency that is stable, outperformed all other emerging economy currencies by a wide margin. So I think all of these things are huge positives for India. And this is in the context when not so long ago, you had people saying that you need to knock India out of BRICS and replace India with Indonesia. So I think we've come a long way. I think we are really a spot of sunshine, like I call it. And it's really up to us what we want to do with this position of advantage that we find ourselves in. On the flip side, I think we have some issues to deal with. So clearly, there is a slowing down of investment in the economy, especially by the private sector. And I think to kickstart that investment by the government in infrastructure is something that becomes critical. I think that is the one factor that will set off a virtuous circle of investment and growth in the economy that all of us are looking for. I think you have issues about ease of doing business, where you really need more collaboration between the states and the center. The states are where the real action happens, and you cannot have in a federal structure like ours a situation where the state is not in sync with the center. And I think the way to do that is to create as much of a competitive environment where each state is vying with the other for the next dollar or rupee of investment. And I think, then you have a few issues that perhaps are not as large, but tax, for example, and the whole issue around tax and the fact that it takes away from the focus on doing business. So you have issues like that, like every economy would. But I would say that in net, the advantages that we have at this point in time far outweigh the problems.
Sure. On the same note, Mr. Mittal, over the past month or so, what has been playing more on your mind? India's much wanted growth potential, or the many local and global challenges that obviously exist? Which of these two have you been thinking about a lot more?
Well, I think India clearly now plays on the global stage. So it is not completely insulated from what's happening around the globe. But as Kumar just mentioned, India has a unique advantage in terms of its demographic, in terms of its robust growth. When the entire developed markets are growing at 2.7%, with Europe down to 1.7%, anything higher than 7% is nothing but a dream. So I would say we should really use India's advantage in a generally globally weak markets. And if you really look at even in the globe, some of the sectors are still doing extremely well. And they are playing, I would say, to advantage of India. And what is remarkable about this new government is that they are creating capacity on one side and demand on the other side almost at the same time. You need to have people sign up for bank accounts to be financially included. On the other hand, 11 payment bank licenses have been granted. A lot of work is going on in that area. India is, as we all know, and some of our foreign friends experience, does not have the same quality of infrastructure that the developed world has, or even China has developed in the last 20 years. But it is mitigating that by going the digital route, by creating a massive digital wave in the country to ensure that we can, in some sense, mitigate the absence of hard infrastructure in the country. Similarly, in the area of healthcare, in the area of manufacturing, on one side you're generating the Make in India wave, on the other side you're ensuring that demand generation keeps on picking up. A lot of bottleneck around the projects that were in play are being cleared very fast. So all in all, I think the play is wonderfully suited to help India grow at 7+% growth. What is very heartening is that the global leaders are now talking very highly about India's potential, India's growth, and gone are the days when we would sit on the opposite side trying to convince them to come to India, have a higher amounts of investments, have more confidence in us. I think it's quite the other way around, whether in Davos or here today.
That's true.
Each one of them, when we hear from them, they talk very highly about India. So in my view, it's a perfect storm for India, in India's favor. I think we should take great advantage of it. And I have no doubt, under the present government and the entrepreneurial spirit of India, we should do well. Just one last closing point I will make is, the government needs to continuously work on ease of doing business in India, keep on making things simple. I think entrepreneurial energy will be fully released if we can make application of all regulations and rules as simple as possible.
Mr. Kotak, a question for you. Some believe that the greatest threat to India's growth comes from outside, not within. A possible hike in the interest rates in the US, a bigger slowdown in China, and some even feel that a prolonged spell of very low oil prices could be counterproductive as well. According to you, how well can India weather such external shocks?
I just look back, say, 10 years ago, and if I was asked a question, what would your dream be for macro for India? And I would say 4 points. Low oil and commodities, low inflation, very low current account deficit, and huge global capacity available for India to build its infrastructure. Today, the dream is true. All the 4 factors globally are available. Low oil, huge capacity out there in the world, low current account, low inflation. This is our time to really think about this as a perfect batting wicket for us to go out there and play our strokes. And at times, I really feel that the certain level of despondency is more from Indians within than a lot of global players from outside, who outside in feel that India is actually such a wonderful place. Therefore, in order to get better, we Indians need to think about this, get a bit of our animal spirit without going on a debt excess binge, but going out and really building India. This is the best opportunity to make India.
How would you see it, Mr. Agarwal? The commodity down cycle, do you see that as a threat at all to what's happening within the country?
In a way, I can see this opportunity. For us, India produced 10% of what China produced. With a similar population, this is the time, what you said is correct, but it's a time to build the capacity. In natural resource, we have been branded as a importer. It must go away. We must produce 50% of our energy. We must produce 50% of our, and that's what entrepreneurship we have in India. If you look at even the electronic, we are importing $100 billion of electronic. And you watch, in 3 to 5 years' time, it will be $500 billion. And we need thousands of entrepreneurs to come up and start manufacturing this. So this is the innovation technology. I'm part of it. When I see the tremendous opportunity, definitely in the short term, we have this in our industry where the prices has gone down. But the great advantage for the country, this money which they are saving, $100 billion, $70 billion in oil, should be channelized into infrastructure.
That's true.
And this should be a marginal money. I always said there is a word called EPC. I would say EPCF, engineering, procurement, construction, and financing. All these 4 together, world has tremendous resource available, and they are looking simplification, whereby you say, this is what we need to do, this is the right of way we have, this is what you have to build in 30 years of financing. So these are the opportunity I look at.
Thank you. On the topic of infrastructure, Mr. Hochberg, you've been coming to India quite frequently the last few years, and you've been tracking infrastructure here very closely. What is your assessment of what's happened in the last 3 to 5 years? Is India moving fast enough on infrastructure?
Well, I don't think any country is moving fast enough on infrastructure, and certainly not the United States, where I come from. But clearly, when I look at what's happened here in the last several years, for example, at EXIM Bank in the United States, we have made more loans and guarantees in India in the last 7 years than all of President Bush and all of President Clinton combined. So the pace has only been accelerating, and we still have a year to go. So I think there is a great move in infrastructure. It begins with power, and I would say I think India is second to no country in the world in terms of its embrace of renewable energy, the national solar mission, the amount of solar power, the move towards nuclear, and the move in transportation. So you look at those are the basic ingredients of infrastructure. Plus you've got a very digital and tech-savvy population, probably one of the most tech-savvy in the world. So you put all those pieces together, you've got a lot of the ingredients, but to keep up with that pace of infrastructure requires a lot of capital and making it a lot simpler. I mean, the front page of your own paper today says, with Make It in India ticket, quality FDR rides a bullet train. So, I mean, it's right on the front page of the paper. That's what needs to happen, and it needs to accelerate.
Mr. Rice, one more question on oil prices. There is a strong view that prolonged spells could actually harm the world economy. What do you see? Is that a threat for India?
I'm not the best person to answer the question that you asked. I think that we need to be preparing for a period of low oil prices. You know, I've been in the Middle East in the last few days, and I don't see any changes that would suggest that oil prices are going to go up in the near term. So countries and companies have to figure out how they need to adjust and turn this into an advantage, if that's possible, or mitigate the disadvantages that go with low oil.
Politics and how it is impacting the pace of reforms is clearly one issue that is on everyone's minds. Mr. Mittal, what is your assessment of the pace of reforms, especially in the light of sharp political differences that do exist?
I think we are all conscious and aware of the logjam that we see in the Parliament. In the last few sessions, we have seen a constant meltdown in the upper house, and no dialogue or much less any bills have been passed. But I think the government has very smartly used the executive way to move things around and move forward. Today, we talk about GST a lot. I think that's one thing that keeps on coming back onto the table. But honestly, the world has not stopped. I mean, trade, industry, everything is moving forward. We are still getting our growth rates. It is a different matter that if we can get the GST through, which I think all of us sitting in this room are hopeful will happen possibly in this upcoming budget session, we could accelerate the pace of our growth by 1.5%, and that we all know makes a tremendous difference in lifting people out of the poverty. So I truly hope that the efforts of everybody in this room and the political leadership is going to bear some fruit in the coming session. I would say other than that, land has been delegated into the states. States are now responsible for giving land, and I think a lot of work is going on. There are not too many other reforms that are truly left, and we do talk about second-generation reforms, but if you really minutely look at it, there's not much left. Defense FDI is allowed, insurance FDI has gone through. I read in your paper the other day that there may be a thinking about opening up or liberalizing the FDI and retail as well. So most of the pieces of foreign investment into the country and for people in India, I think reforms are in place, and I hope GST goes through. It is really the ease of doing business, which is directly and squarely in the hands of the executive, that needs attention, and I'm very pleased to say our Prime Minister is committed to bring India's ranking in the ease of doing business to a good, strong, healthy 2 digits from where we are on a medium to high level 3-digit number at the moment.
Mr. Birla, what more can this government do to send out a very strong pro-growth, pro-reform message, especially in the coming budget?
So I think we've got a great opportunity just now in the budget. And I believe that what the government can do, like I'm sure all of us hope they will do, is a huge thrust on infrastructure. And also, what a lot of us in this room would want is a lowering of corporate taxes, which is something that the government has been talking about. And also simplification of tax processes and legal issues. So I think broadly that is what one would look for in the budget. Like Sunil said, I don't think that there's too much left to do, and I think that these 2 or 3 large ticket items would make a big impact.
Mr. Barton, I'm told that you meet pretty much 2 CEOs every single day. From what you've been hearing from the global CEOs that you meet, are they happy with the pace of reforms, especially in the light of the political challenges we've been facing?
Well, I think they reflect a lot of what's been said at the table here. I think there's a much higher appetite, I think, and excitement about what's happening. In some ways, it may be more than the reality of what can actually happen, but I would say there's been a significant shift. It was not on the table, and I've said it publicly myself 5 years ago. I would say don't spend your time. It's too difficult. It's challenging. I think it's changed significantly. I think one of the biggest indicators, though, are actually some of the pension funds. And I noticed the Premier of Ontario is here in a delegation from Canada. Being a Canadian, I have to point that out. That one of the groups she represents is a very significant set of long-term investors, I think some of the best in the world, who've invested and are making significant investments into India. And I think that's the surest sign of, I think, change and where things are moving and what we should look at. So it's very positive. Of course, we all want things to go faster. I'd love it to go 5 times faster, but I think there's a sense that things are moving, and we're seeing it with the capital.
Mr. Witty, I think you brought the entire GSK board here to India a few years ago for them to see the opportunity that exists here. As a global investor, what more would you like to see happen on the ground in terms of ease of doing business?
I think you've heard some of the, let's call it the higher level issues addressed already. I actually think India, of course, in that way, has many of the same challenges as a company. Sometimes it feels very hard to set the strategy. It feels pretty hard to set the policy. It's really hard to get the implementation. And the bigger your company and the more complex the system, the harder it gets. So actually, I think there's a really strong argument to focus on consolidation and implementation of many of the things which have already been begun, remembering that, like any company, people inside of India are used to working in an old way, or the old way, let's say, and you want those same people to learn to work in the new way. If I had one learning from my experience of running a reasonably, in fact, far too complicated company, if I had one lesson I've learned from that, is that we always initially overcomplicate every process, and we always end up going back to streamline and simplify every process, and the best quality always comes from the simplest process. And I would just humbly suggest, that in the context of regulation, there's quite an inspiration to be taken from that comment. Because regulation globally has become like a Christmas tree, ever more complex and decorative. It's a question about whether it's become more effective. And I think that in India there's a great opportunity to think about what are the challenges of making sure that hundreds of thousands and millions of people can implement the regulation and follow it in a straightforward way. And that would be one area I would encourage a focus.
Find us on Facebook at facebook.com/ETNow, and don't forget to click the like button. You can also follow us on Twitter at ETNowLive. To stay updated with all our programming, hit the subscribe button on our YouTube channel by logging on to youtube.com/user/ETNow.